Hello, Namaskar, and welcome to Talking Point Blank. So, today we are going to talk about something which is very much in news, has been for last 3 years. But I'm not going to talk about it. I have an eminent guest with me, uh, a distinguished fellow from India Foundation, somebody who has been following Northeast, following the eastern borders, following Myanmar. Uh, I would say since they have been out of college. So somebody who is an expert on this domain, on this area. Uh, Ms. Rami Desai, Distinguished Fellow of India Foundation. Ma'am, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking out this time and doing this with me.
Raja, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be on your show.
I'm honored, ma'am. It's truly my honor. So, I want to begin with, the trouble always comes from the West, but they say the threat is coming from the East. How do you see it building up on the eastern side of our borders?
Nicely put, Raja. I've always said this for a very long time that we've been too focused on the western frontier of our country. I think one of the reasons was because the West was interested in the western frontier of our country. Um, the Northeast has been ignored for a very long time because it was too complex. It's a very, there are 7 states to deal with. We didn't understand the demography. It was just something that didn't hold a place in people's imagination. And now we see that people are taking more of an interest because of the trouble that's brewing around um, the northeastern borders, whether it's Myanmar, whether it's Bangladesh. Um, there's the threat of China. Now people have started taking an interest in it, and I think it's high time that they're doing so because I think we are very close to things becoming far more complicated than we would like it. Of course, I'm sure we talk about this more, but you know that the borders are enormous and they're porous, they are unpluggable. And with conflict going on in a lot of countries around us, the threat is imminent.
So when we talk about Northeast, ma'am, right? Most of the people want to know कि ये threat क्या है. ये जो नॉर्थ ईस्ट में हमने मणिपुर में वी सॉ गोइंग इन अ प्रीटी बैड स्टेट नाउ इट इज स्टेबलाइजिंग ठीक है हमने नागालैंड में बहुत टाइम तक देखा त्रिपुरा इज अनदर वन असम इज अनदर वन बट primarily Manipur, the conflict in Manipur. Is it a tribal conflict? Is it a Hindu Christian conflict? Is it a multi-ethnic conflict? What is this conflict really about, which we have seen brewing in Manipur, especially?
Well, you can look at it from multiple perspectives. No conflict, as you know, Raja, very well, is because of one reason. There are always multiple layers. There's a prolonged emotional sort of process also that goes behind conflict in terms of there's some aspiration that is not being fulfilled, or there are some demands that are not being met, or there are external factors. Manipur, we saw all of this come together and it became the kind of explosive situation that we saw it become. Of course, it is on one hand a tribal, non tribal issue because uh, the conflict did start with the demand for a scheduled tribe status by the Metis community, which was then confronted by the Kuki community, who didn't feel that the Metis should have demanded for a scheduled tribe status, or a scheduled tribe status should not be given to them. Of course, this came after a High Court order which recommended to the state government that it may be looked into the demand for a scheduled tribe status, and this also happened. This is not something that this demand is not new. This demand has been there for a very long time. I think they had filed for this demand maybe in 2015. It just so happened that it came up and the High Court gave this recommendation to the state government. But again, it was very peculiar in the sense that that the state government alone cannot fulfill that demand. It's a very long process. To get a scheduled tribe status, it has to go through the NCST, it has to go through the TRI, so on and so forth. It takes years, if not decades. Um, so this was, I think, reaction that was not preempted, that it would be such a harsh reaction. But of course, there have been historical legacied reasons for this sort of discomfort between communities. And I'm choosing my words very carefully here, because even though violence has come down in Manipur, things are still hot in terms of that there is mistrust between communities. Um, and there isn't the kind of comfort that they share with each other that they shared before the conflict, even though it wasn't 100% comfort, but there was still some meeting point. That meeting point has disappeared and they haven't been able to bring it back. So I think it was a tribal non-tribal issue. You know the case very well in terms of the fact that there was the Metis asked for this demand because they felt that they only were a part of 10% of the land, and the scheduled tribe land was 90%. And 10% here, I say with caution, because if you actually remove the highways, the water bodies, it's probably only 7%. But, their population is more or less a little bit more than the tribal population in the state. So I think there is an insecurity because of that. That is why the demand was made. There are also benefits that you get with having a scheduled tribe status,
Mm,
reservations,
mm.
income tax exemption. So obviously that is very, that seems like a really good deal. And I believe that everybody has the opportunity in this country to demand. Whether they get it or not is dependent on the processes that are laid down for these demands. So, of course, they were well within their rights to demand it for whatever their anxieties were, like I said, land being one of them. Now, when it comes to the religious issue, right at the outset, it wasn't a religious issue.
It was.
It wasn't.
It wasn't.
But because there are so many factors involved in it, including external factors that manipulate uh, fault lines, that we did see it become one to a certain extent. Um, but let me say this, that right at the outset, when the conflict broke out, people were really quick to jump the gun, saying that, oh, this is because of religion, this is because of religion, because it's not just a Hindu Christian thing. It can't be, because the Metis are not one homogeneous group.
Right.
You have Hindus, you have Muslims, you have Christians, you have Sanamahis, which is their, indigenous faith. Amongst the cookies, of course, they're majority Christian. But what happens is international, and please allow me a minute here, an international, the international world loves to see any conflict in India from the lens of a religious conflict. It works for them.
Yeah.
That's why the Americans, the European Union was so quick to label this as an attack on the minorities,
Especially the Christians.
especially the Christians. And again, in a state like Manipur, what is a minority?
How
You
do you
know,
define
how do
minority?
you define a minority? Who isn't a minority?
Mhm.
Are the Metis who follow Sanamaism not minorities? Are the cookies who follow Christianity not the majority? I mean, I'm just saying, how do you define it? By population? By religion? Whatever you're defining it by, the lens doesn't fit in Manipur. Um, the cookies is one tribal group. There are the Nagas also. That's what makes actually Manipur a very special case, because it's not just two communities that live there. There are multiple communities that live there. Manipur's also been our gateway to the rest of Southeast Asia. Therefore, on the borders, you'll find a lot of uh, a lot of communities from other parts of India who have been there for for generations to do business. So we saw the European Union file an emergency resolution on Manipur, saying that, oh, this is the government must intervene, do something, this conflict. I looked at each and every person who was a representative of the European Union, member of the European Union, um, a member of the European Parliament. I looked at their background just to check, do they have any expertise on India? Do they have any expertise on the Northeast? Do they have any expertise on tribal politics, affairs,
Mhm.
nothing. Most of them,
It's
like
pretty much what we have seen in Kashmir, we have seen in Punjab.
we've seen
So
it.
same modus operandi.
It's the same modus operandi. India want, they want to defame India on the basis of the fact that for some reason, the majority, which is usually the Hindus, are oppressing everybody else, so on and so forth. So it became a religious issue because people wanted to use that lens. And then later on, within also, we have to learn to blame ourselves also for things that we do. People actively went to these organizations with their,
Hmm.
with their appeals. There were appeals to intervene in the United Nations, the European Parliament. Why would you go to institutions that anyway hold no power in this day and age, where the question of their existence, is now murky? Why do they exist? Whether they'll exist in another 50 years is also a big question mark. Why would you go there when they have no expertise and expect a third party like that to intervene? So people also did that. Communities also manipulated it. They manipulated them back, and therefore it became an issue.
Do you think this was being planned for a very long time by the external forces? Because I'll tell you something, when the trouble brewed, the way it escalated, especially the kind of weapons we saw, the cookies using, and then the Metis also having some, but predominantly we saw on the cookie side, they have those American made weapons, rocket launchers as well. Do you think they were prepping up for something like this? They were looking for an excuse to, create something in Manipur. And why only Manipur? Why not Nagaland?
Look, I will have to say that initially when this happened, I was like, let's just look at the conflict just the way it is. Let's not try to read too much into it. Let's not speculate. But I think over a period of time, what became clear is the kind of clash that happened and how instantaneously it happened after the order was passed. It seemed like it was a little bit pre-planned. And I wouldn't be surprised because over a period of time, we've also seen many other things come to light, whether it was Sheikh Hasina's statement saying, the West was interested in a Christian state. I'm not saying that this was really a conflict
For
based
the
on that. I'm not saying that. But of course, there'd be enough external actors to be able to support you.
Hmm.
And like you said, the weapons and this. See, the thing about weapons is that because there has been this a prolonged period of time where conflict has been a part of these borders, the supply chain of weapons and people using them, or this ability to activate yourself, is fairly quick. So I think that has always been there, and I think that'll continue to be there as things escalate in Myanmar. We are also seeing now the ethnic armed organizations across the border using really sophisticated weapons, using drone technology, which we saw in Manipur
Yeah.
as well, being used rampantly. So I think as this also becomes, technology also becomes more accessible, you can find paths, you can build drones yourself, and the kind of insurgents that you have now, or the kind of militia groups you have now, they're not any longer run by illiterate people. You have leadership that's educated, that is very politically savvy, that has a grip on geopolitics, strategy, and they come from an educated background of engineers or
Mhm.
technicians, so they can do all of this. So I think when we look at this sort of exchange, I think that's always been there and that'll continue to be there, and we'll see more and more of it if we don't watch out.
So that poses a greater threat. There's one thing to deal with radicalized people who are not educated, but there's another thing to deal with educated people who are specifically being trained to carry out this kind of an activity in an area. Uh, which takes me back. How do you see, Nagaland shaping up, or how do you see the challenges in Tripura right now, or for that matter in Assam as well?
Look, at this point, I look at everything from the point of view of what's happening in Myanmar and Bangladesh. Because when we look at the Northeast and we look at Nagaland, we look at Manipur, we look at Tripura, we look at Assam, our threats are really not from the inside. In terms of we were on a really great trajectory
Hmm.
where development had taken precedence. And I say this because I've seen the region over a period of 20 plus years where I've been traveling. And I remember there was a point where no young person wanted to stay back. They were all living in Chennai, they were living in Delhi, Bangalore. There was nothing to do there. There was conflict, there were curfews, there used to be road tax collection, proper stamped illegal tax collection across. I still remember, and it's a story I like to tell, that there used to be so much of tax collection, illegal tax collection by groups, that there was actually an organization that came up, which was which was created by a bunch of young professionals in Nagaland, which was to not fight illegal tax collection, but to appeal to them, saying, let's not collect multiple taxes because it's too expensive for us. Can we just combine it like a
Oh,
GST,
wow.
and collect one tax?
So they
So,
came up with that idea.
yeah, but it had become so psychologically institutionalized in a way
Hmm.
that they were okay with that. They were okay with paying
Certain tax on this.
illegal tax. So I've seen times like that. When I used to travel, there were no hotels to stay in. There was The roads were terrible, terrible. One had to travel by public transportation to go to some of the remote areas, and you would be cramped because there'd be far and few buses, and the buses were terrible. So, people would stand. I still remember one time when it was a 17-hour journey, and I had one guy who was, I think, mildly drunk, who put his elbow like this on my head, and that's how he traveled while I was sitting throughout. So you didn't have any better way of traveling. There weren't any taxis that would go. You had to travel in broad daylight. I remember Manipur used to have day long curfews. So I used to wonder, how can you run a business?
How would you survive day to day life,
It used to be
education?
so the rich could, or at least people who could afford to, they send their kids away. One of the other reasons that they send their kids away, apart from conflict or them joining insurgent groups, was also because they didn't want them to get into the whole drug scene.
Hmm.
There was a point when Manipur had the highest HIV, and then now it shifted to Mizoram because drugs used to be so easily available that parents were worried that kids would get addicted, and that became really problematic. So they'd send their kids away. So they'd collect all their money just to send their kids away so that they could have a better life. It was not the way I used to look at it is for a very long time. It was not, it almost didn't feel like, well, it wasn't the same growing up as I did when I was in Delhi. You have a certain sense of security. We had places to go to, people to meet. You couldn't do any of
We
that
remember
there.
because same was in Kashmir in 90s when I
Same
was
was
growing up.
in
That
Kashmir.
was very
And there
difficult.
was complete political apathy.
Yes.
It's like people didn't want, they'd left them to their own devices. And I think that happened a long, long time ago. Jawaharlal Nehru also said his famous goodbyes. So it happened a long, long time ago. I would even say that it happened pre independence in a certain way, where the British said that let's just put an ILP, leave them to their own devices,
Let them carry on with their
let
own
them
lives.
carry on because we can't tame them.
No,
The
even it took us a lot of time to actually, address this problem. I think last 10 years is something where there's been a lot of focus on Northeast.
huge amount of focus, and I think that changed lives. So I think what happened is that somebody as popular as the Prime Minister, who clearly enjoys a certain amount of confidence of the people also, making the Northeast a central point of his dialogue every given opportunity, gave attention to the region. Once it gave attention to the region, there was a certain bridging of the psychological gap that had happened pre-independence, post-independence. And once that psychological gap started being bridged, see, the geographical gap is one thing,
Yeah.
but the psychological gap is a huge thing. You have to have trust to
Mm.
start building upon
That
that.
is the main thing, basically.
Correct. Then the geographical gap also started being built on, wherein development took precedence. We've never built roads as fast as we have built ever in the history of India, as we are building right now in the
That is true.
Northeast, in the Northeast
Same in
itself.
Kashmir.
Same in Kashmir. Infrastructure in the sense of not just roads, but railway lines, uh, making the effort to bring underground groups overboard. The kind of, Raja, the kind of post, when post sort of uh, insurgency programs that they brought in. For example, when insurgents come overboard, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They've been in the jungles, they've been militants. You have to have a robust way to keep them
Involved in a society,
involved
it's
in a
very difficult.
society, or at least get them to adjust in a society. So, for example, interest-free loans were given to them. Loans were given for them to start businesses. There was a lot of good work done by a lot of big organizations, like even Art of Living, to give them some amount of uh, some amount of calm after what they had been through. So there was spiritual intervention that was encouraged. And there were many such programs that the government actively implemented, but also made an effort to sign certain ceasefire agreements that earlier on was, nobody just cared about it. They didn't even make an effort. So I think all of that created a sense of security, and the development aspect. People started having more trust as peace came in. People started investing, and businesses came up. People started running hotels. I think the usage of social media also helped, because people showcase their own culture, which is interesting to people. But nobody was going to go if there wasn't any
Yeah.
security. It's like, unfortunately, what we see in Pahalgam, what's happened, tourism had started going back, and now you see that people have a trust deficit. They don't want to go.
Obviously.
So that's what happened in the Northeast. Unfortunately for Manipur, which was doing so well, because I remember not knowing a place to eat there, two really fancy restaurants coming up, which were serving their own cuisine, wherein these were kids who used to be outside, and they came back to Manipur, because that's obviously where you prefer
Yeah,
to
and
live
you
if you're from
contribute
there.
as well.
Yeah.
So you build it up, rebuild
And
the
they built it
place.
up, and then business was closed. So, unfortunately for Manipur, that has happened. But your question, of course, and I've veered a little bit
No,
away,
that's fine. That's
is
good. Because you need to understand the whole thing.
yeah. So I think now what's happened is, we have we'll always have certain anti-national elements.
Hmm.
We'll always have groups of people, segments of people who are willing to uh, take external help for their own benefit. It's a power play. Mostly it's the politics of this power that comes with this sort of
Yeah.
revolutionary leadership,
It's what we call the conflict economy,
yeah, the conflict
the
economy.
conflict power.
And yeah, that's a way for people to gain the kind of relevance that they feel that they had lost during this time. Now, with Myanmar and Bangladesh, the problem is that both these countries are in a state of utter chaos. And I don't see any of this chaos abating anytime soon. This chaos will continue. Have no,
And
confusion on
how
it.
potent is the threat to us from these two countries?
Huge, because you see, transnational ethnic ties, we saw the building of that. Even during the Manipur conflict, nobody is saying that there aren't cousin tribes the other side. The British, wherever they've gone, they've pulled borders without any sense of what communities that live
Hmm.
there. So they've literally, if you look at Africa, it's just like they've got a ruler, and it's straight
Yeah, they've
lines.
just Literally divided it into
literally
four
divided it.
parts. Yeah.
So here also, obviously, they had no sense. They're the worst cartographers ever. And they obviously divided cousin tribes. You'll find some tribes there, some tribes. But that's also how tribal communities live. Of course, these transnational tribes, we saw them, we saw almost a resurgence of that sort of connection building up during the conflict, which usually happens because everybody's emotions are heightened. But now that can be manipulated by anybody who wants to. One. Number two, our borders are porous. So the migration that's going to happen with failing economies in these two countries is not going to happen anywhere else. It's going to come into India. Number three, the kind of weapons that are floating, the kind of radicalization that is happening. We've seen we've seen Bangladesh, from what we had hoped for it to have a secular fiber, become completely radicalized today.
Yeah. In last 15-20 years.
It's happened slowly, and it's come as a rude shock. Once we've seen the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, it's come as a rude shock that it's actually out there in the open. Burning of Mujibur's house, taking down of his statues. These may be smaller things in the larger situation that's now emerging, but these were symbols of secularism that were pulled down. And we've seen the power play. We've seen the kind of forces, whether it's Jamaat, whether it's ISI, whether it's the ISI Bangladeshi nexus that is building, that that level of radicalization is going to have its impact on us. It's had before, and it'll have now
Now
as
as
well, in the future as well. Myanmar, this chaos is going to continue. There are so many stakeholders, there are so many players, they have sophisticated weapons, there are multiple countries that are involved, just like in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, we knew 2 years before Sheikh Hasina's ouster that there
well.
is an ouster coming.
Yeah.
I mean, the previous ambassador, American ambassador to Bangladesh, was making all sorts of comments, visiting election commissions. There were statements being given from the West saying that you must have a free and fair election, almost like they were building the ground for the narrative that Sheikh Hasina's elections weren't going to be free and fair. Um, in Myanmar, also, you see external stakeholders, you see countries, big countries having an involvement. These guys, where are they going to be? They're going to be at our doorstep. So it's going to have a host of problems, not just one problem, a host of problems that we are going to have to counter.
Ma'am, there's one thing talking about China being involved in Myanmar. And then what we are seeing in Manipur is that the Americans are being caught often. Last time also we had, our intelligence agency caught a couple of Americans. Just recently we had another Americans who have been caught. What is so, different with the Americans that what they're trying to do in Myanmar? Is it that we are becoming collateral damage between the Chinese and the Americans, or is it that the Americans and the Chinese are actually playing a game against us when it comes to the Northeast?
Look, I think there's always been this issue with the Northeast, wherein it's so strategically located that everybody was wanted a piece of the pie. It's rich in natural resources. Of course, it is the frontier in terms of a counter to China. Pre independence, the British, while they were leaving India, actually wanted to keep the Northeast as a crown colony. So even they had figured then, so this is nothing new. They had figured then that this is a very important region. They'd made what is called the Coupland Plan. It was also called the Crown Colony Plan, where they would have direct rule on the Northeast. Luckily, they ran out of money, and that,
After the
wasn't,
World War II.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that wasn't possible, luckily for us. But unfortunately, we have done nothing to safeguard ourselves for the longest time. It is this dispensation, like we discussed earlier, that has paid attention to the Northeast and has consistently spoken about how valuable it is to, you know, uh, to the rest of the country. But it was for the longest time it was ignored, and the same policies that the British had brought in to divide and rule, which they had done everywhere else, they've done in the Northeast as well. What is the inner line permit? Today people think it's a privilege, they feel it's for their protection, but it was brought in to contain warring
Yeah, basically
communities.
you're creating something called exclusivity.
Exclusivity, but they didn't even see it as that. When they brought it in, they basically figured that, look, we can't tame the Nagas because they keep coming down the hills, and the British um, trade routes, they keep attacking them, and they were fierce warriors, and the British didn't know what to do with them. So they figured the way that we do this is we keep them aside. Now, what happened in that is that the development process got hampered because even post independence, Jawaharlal Nehru's tribal affairs advisor, Verrier Elvin, who was a man from the West, was a missionary. People say he, converted to Hinduism, so on and so forth. But he kept saying that no, no, we must keep them separate because we must preserve their identity. Now, I have strong problems with that narrative because who are you to preserve any identity or enforce any sort of
No,
preservation?
that is true, because if you look at India, we all preserve our cultural identity. We all are proud Gujaratis, proud
Correct.
Kashmiris, proud
Everybody is proud
Punjabis.
everything.
Everybody is proud, even proud Delhiite.
Yeah.
So the preservation of culture is there, but then assimilation of the minds is also there. Assimilation of different
But
ethnicities is
see, the
also there.
British were so smart that there's a often I quote this letter because I think it tells us about their psychology, is that there was a political officer in the Northeast who wrote a letter to the British government at the time and said, look, we are making a big mistake by trying to convert the upper castes in this country. That's why we are not meeting with any success. I've just come to the Northeast and I've encountered pretty much what he said is I've encountered these wild people. He used these really interesting words. He said, they are at a nascent stage of nationhood.
Hmm.
So your ambition is not to really allow them to merge with the nation. And this was brought up later by G.S. Ghurye, who was, in my opinion, a great sociologist. He was the head of the Department of Sociology of Bombay University. And he used to have these great, dialogues with Verrier Elvin in written. And Verrier Elvin couldn't stand him because Ghurye would put him into depression. And he used to say this man's completely lost his mind because this kind of withholding development in these areas means you're stopping them from integrating
Yes.
with the rest of the country, also keeping them backward. And that can't be a good thing. On the contrary, he said we must remind them of our common civilizational roots so that as we come together as a nation in the modern sense, there is this sort of brotherhood that we have. And Verrier Elvin's argument was that no, 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 um, um, let them come to a stage.
Them evolve to that
Huh.
stage where they come into this.
So to me, that's insane because you're saying that these people are not capable enough to decide for themselves where they want to be, to receive the development advantage that every other person in this country has, and they are not smart enough to be able to preserve their own cultural
That is
identity.
also going against the constitution, the basic tenet of constitution, when you're actually saying that people are not ready to be there. I mean, you cannot just keep people away
Look,
because you think they're not ready enough to.
I don't think the previous dispensation cared like they cared about, they didn't care about a lot of other things. Unfortunately, I don't think they cared about the constitution to that extent. They did what they liked. They were being advised by people who weren't experts to advise. Do you know that uh, Nefa, Arunachal, these areas were, for the longest time, they came under the MEA, Ministry of
Yeah.
External Affairs.
Yes,
For
which
what
was
reason?
bizarre.
It was bizarre. Means, where is the logic? Who has advised you? Why have you not questioned it? Or have you come up with this brilliant idea yourself? So, how do we expect now in the last 10 years that, that this government has paid attention to the Northeast? Also, I think our expectations are all our problems should be solved. It's not going to happen, Raja.
We look for a magic wand and we think that everything
अभी
will
ये
get
क्यों नहीं
solved.
हुआ है
This government
अभी
has
वो
to
क्यों
solve
नहीं हुआ है
everything in 1 month or 3 months up, 10 दिन में क्यों नहीं हो. But that's a psyche, and I think that has got more to do with expectation also. That they believe
correct
that they can solve things, and then they
see
get disappointed when they don't see it
see
happening in a
people
particular
should have
time, and it
expectations
is good.
and you should ask the government for accountability and you should be able to say, well, I expect the maximum. However, wrongs that have been done for decades cannot become rights. You can't correct them overnight. Unfortunately, that is what it is.
No, it takes years,
It takes years.
like we're
Now,
seeing in
somebody
Kashmir.
who's grown up with a mind of being a separatist,
Hmm.
do you think that overnight, you're going to be able to convince
It's
him?
not
No,
possible.
it's almost ingrained.
It's a generational work.
It's a generational work. On the contrary, I think it is these groups, these separatist groups, even if you look at coming back to Manipur, even if you look at the conflict there, it's Manipur is a state with so many CSOs, so many groups, bodies, NGOs, all sorts of things. Nobody's been able to come on the negotiating table because now, it's like the separatist tendency that certain groups had before. They feel that they have a chance now.
No, because the interest is more to keep the pot boiling than to come on a common table and resolve it. But then I want to take you to Myanmar,
Mhm.
and we have seen changes happening from last 3 years, right? Now, lately, we are seeing Arakan army making huge inroads into Myanmar. How do you see Myanmar shaping up in next couple of years?
Look, as you know, I have recently traveled there, um, and I did my field work and I was in all sorts of areas and I met all stakeholders. The one way that I describe Myanmar is that it's a very anxious country. People don't want to talk about politics. People don't want to talk about the conflict. Um, they want to talk about everything else but that.
Can I ask you something?
Hmm.
Are people in Myanmar even thinking as a country, or are they now become more like they have regions? The Shan region is different, the Kayan region is different. Are they more of a regional identity, or they still have that, mindset of being a country today? Is it there, or is it more
Look,
fractured?
that's an interesting question, but I'll have to give you a little bit of a precursor to that before I answer it, because you have to understand what Myanmar has become.
Hmm.
For instance, that Myanmar always had these regional aspirations, their own ethnicities, their own communities did matter to them. And somehow the real, true sense of federalism never sort of seeped in Myanmar politics. That, of course, has now become heightened because of many reasons. A, the prolonged emotional process again, where you feel that you're not being represented. And it's not just the Tatmadaw, it's not just the military. Even when NLD came, it's not as if in that democratic system they gave more federal powers. The chief minister still came from the center,
Right.
not necessarily also a person from there. Little things like this bothered them. However, now there are two narratives in Myanmar. One is that Myanmar is a unified country and it must remain unified, and that we have a common history, common experience, and that must be preserved at all costs. Some people call it, the West loves to call it hyper-nationalism because the military speaks like this.
Hmm.
And they have a very difficult relationship with the military. So the military believes that there should be unity and that they won't have it any other way. Now, I met some ethnic armed organizations as well. And it's kind of different for each one of them. So some of them want, to be a part of, uh, Myanmar as we see it today. And their demand is solely based on the fact that we must have more federalism. Some really don't care. And that's, to me, from the point of view of India, a very dangerous thing, because they're okay if they're not a part of Myanmar. They're okay if Myanmar breaks up. If Myanmar breaks up, what do we do? How many people do we negotiate with? At this point, there are over 200 EOs, ethnic armed organizations. In one state, there can be multiple stakeholders. They might even war with each other at times for territorial control. So, who are we going to negotiate with? How do we know that other people are not going to jump in, other external forces are not going to jump in? So, I think in Myanmar, the situation's complex, Raja, beyond belief.
That bad.
Like, trust me, a month that I was there, um, of course, it was a real view for me, really on ground view of what is happening. And I think nobody would say with certainty that they know the situation 100%. Nobody should say it because it's so dynamic, it's changing every day. But the amount of groups, the amount of players, the amount of stakeholders, the amount of people interested in different things. China's there, the Americans are interested. Obviously, it has an impact on India. There are groups in Bangladesh like the Rohingyas, that's a constant bother for the Myanmaris, especially for the Arakans.
And
Um,
for us, also,
uh, for us, though, it's been a
they're a big
problem
vote.
for the longest time. I mean, it's one of the most problematic issues that is going to emerge from Bangladesh if Bangladesh cannot straighten its act.
Which
But
haven't seen happening, to be very honest. And we'll go to Bangladesh,
we'll
but I
go to
want to,
Bangladesh. But Myanmar is so complex right now. Now, what's happened really in Myanmar is certain groups have emerged as bigger groups than the others. You also know about the National Unity Government in Exile, which is a government in exile, and they have their own problems. So some of the EOs belong to the NUG, but not belong, they come under the umbrella of
right.
the NUG. And those EOs are, uh, they work with the NUG in wanting to negotiate whatever they have to negotiate with the Tatmadaw. But then there are some who've gone at it on their own. So Arakan is not a part of the NUG.
They're part of the Three Brother Alliance, right?
Three Brotherhood Alliance, but that also,
And they are broken up from the National Unity Government, the NUG.
the three Brotherhood Alliance is MNDA,
Yeah, MD.
Tang, and Arakan. Arakan only has about, I think, 5,000-6,000 people in the northern
Part
area.
of Myanmar.
Yeah. MNDA and Tang, MNDA specifically, the leadership was in China because it was this present senior General Ling who had chucked them out. And when China wanted to launch Three Brotherhood Alliance against the Tatmadaw because they wanted them to control the illegal activities that is happening on the border, the northern border, because it impacts Chinese citizens directly.
And what are these illegal activities? If you could
So
just
at that time, it was casinos, gambling, all of which is not allowed in China, and therefore
digital scams.
Digital scams, huge amount of them. And I mean, to the extent that all these scams are they were being tested in China because a lot of the scammers, um, all these IT guys who were coming as well, were being brought in from China with the promise of jobs.
Okay.
And then disappearing there. So that became a huge problem because, China only has a one child policy.
Yeah.
There was a lot of internal pressure saying you're not doing anything because kids were disappearing. Not everybody. Sure, some knew why they were going, but others were being scammed into going there. And if you look at these scam centers, they're huge and they have dormitory like systems, they have everything there, they are surrounded by armed guards. Gambling was another big problem, casinos. So these were the things that China had been putting pressure on the Tatmadaw to shut down. When they didn't see any active uh, pursuit to shutting these down from the Tatmadaw. They launched the Three Brotherhood Alliance, and that's when MNDA was launched back. However, the Chinese have influence not just on these EEOs but also on the Tatmadaw now.
So basically, they're playing the both sides.
They're playing both sides and they're playing it very well. So the Three Brotherhood Alliance, obviously, see, China needs to protect its assets in Myanmar.
Which are?
It has investments like the Shapshu port, the oil and gas pipelines. They have ambitions of a rail line that goes in the same line as the
We
oil and
also
gas
have
pipeline.
something with Myanmar, which is going
Yeah.
towards, the
We
ASEAN.
also have the Asian Trilateral
Yeah.
Highway. We have the Kaladan Multimodal Project. We have Sitwe. And we have ambitions of our Act East policy of, again, Manipur, More opening up to, the rest of the world.
How feasible is that policy today?
So this is what China is doing. So China wants Myanmar to be stable so that it can build its ambitions.
Okay.
Right? India, of course, also wants stability so that it can build its, ambitions.
You can't build this,
But
both
you can't do
countries
it
won't
in
be able to
chaos.
do it.
And like I said, I see this chaos going on for a while. Now, what's happened is the Chinese obviously are major stakeholders. There's huge influence. I went to some areas which used to be Indian diaspora dominated, like 3 generations, 4 generations ago, people who had come and settled there. Now you see a lot of Chinese there. A lot of places I saw China daily. And nobody buys it. They have a guy who just comes and delivers it. It's free newspapers, so people keep it. You see this kind of influence. So what China's technically done is now it's also built its bridges with the Tatmadaw to a certain extent. There was a recent conference, recent means I think it's 6-8 months now, the Mekong Ganga. What's it called? Yeah. This conference was in China.
Mm-hmm.
And the senior general was invited there.
From the junta?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was invited there. So, which means that there's some amount of legitimacy that they're extending to him. But also the fact that China can negotiate both sides. So, for example, they launched the Three Brotherhood Alliance, then they stopped them from going any further. We've just seen the withdrawal of MNDA from Lashio Township, which is a very big township. And the reason that they were pulled back is because China intervened. And they said, no, you can't go on more territory because they are worried about the infrastructure, but they are also negotiating for the Tatmadaw. So now Lashio Township MNDA has let go.
So it's largely remote controlled by the Chinese.
Chinese, not these groups, right? Now coming to Arakan, Arakan's more on our side in terms of the geographical location. It's on, what is it, the Western Front,
the
right?
Western Front of us.
So it's on the Western Front. Now, Arakan, in all of this chaos with NUG, MNDA, TANG, has emerged as one of the biggest players. Now, remember, it's the new kid on the block. It's not been there around. Kachin Independence Army has been there around.
Are the Chinese now prepping up the Arakan independent of the Three Brother Alliance?
See, the Arakan, I don't think the Chinese are prepping Arakan because Arakan, we've seen a growth trajectory like we haven't seen before. Remember, like I said, Arakan's the new kid on the block, but Arakan has a young, new, educated, dynamic leadership.
Okay.
Their 2 senior generals are very well versed with how the international world works. They have great networks. They have control over all parts of Rakhine State in terms of there used to be a time when maybe the southern part of Rakhine didn't feel comfortable with the other parts. But one of the generals is from the southern part. He understands the psychology, so on and so forth. They talk about the Rakita way of life, which is inspires the memories of the erstwhile Arakan Empire, which was, I think, from, if I'm not mistaken, maybe from, I think, 1757, around that time, it ended.
A couple of centuries back.
Yeah, it ended at that point. But,
so they're basically looking at historical moorings to get...
Correct. So I think it was between 1457 and 1757, if I'm not mistaken. But it's not too far back for them to believe that it can revive itself. And, the Arakans consider themselves far stauncher Buddhists than they consider the Bamars,
Mhm.
which is, which is the majority ethnicity in Myanmar. So they consider themselves stauncher. They feel that the others have, the Bamars have not necessarily been kind to them in terms of according them equal respect. Like sometimes their accent is made fun of, so on and so forth. So there's been this historical problem, and therefore they've wanted some amount of independence. Now, Arakan has emerged as such a big player because they've been so strategic. Like I said, they have international networks that they have gone at it initially on their own. KIA was supporting them.
Hmm.
So they started, I think, in 2009 or whatever, with the support of Kachin Independence Army. And then they built on that, but they just moved so strategically that they made the right contacts, they made the right moves. And today they are giving training to a lot of the other EOs. They have a great supply chain of weapons. They have connections in the right places. They have their soldiers that are placed in other regions as well, like now coming to Three Brotherhood Alliance. That's why, about 5,000-6,000 were there,
Mhm.
but they are in other places as well. They are not a part of the NUG umbrella. They are confident that they can negotiate on their own terms.
So they are emerging as a big power play. But there's a perception in India that Arakan army is something which is beneficial for India, or you not beneficial in a sense, but which suits our state as well. How true is that perception in India?
See, I think we have to understand Arakan from where it's located, the Rakhine state. Um, they've managed to take 15 townships out of the 18.
Hmm.
They've managed to extend to Paletwa in Chin state, which has borders with India.
India. They're also at Sitwe.
They have Shapshu, they have
Sitwe.
Sitwe, but see, Arakan has not, Rakhine has, these two places, but Arakan has not taken them over. Arakan has not taken Sitwe yet. So
Okay.
out of the 18, 15 hai. The three remaining is Sitwe.
Hmm. But they have been stopping the Bangladeshi ships on the Sitwe port.
See, they may do a lot of things. As we know, there have been some skirmishes in the
Hmm.
outpost, Bangladesh outpost, also by the Arakan, but that's not really of their interest. I think the question we must be asking ourselves is they've emerged as a big power. They've had certain decent relations with India, apart from one or two instances. They are Buddhists. They are obviously extremely influential in the political turmoil as well as the conflict turmoil that is happening, the
Hmm.
turmoil that's happening in Myanmar. We must ask ourselves, if they've taken 15, why haven't they taken the other three?
And why do you think
Now,
that
people
is?
will say Manong is one, which is an island.
Hmm.
Then you have Sitwe and you have Shapshu. Now, people might say that they don't have naval power.
Okay.
Tatmadaw has naval power. So if they take it, they won't be able to fight the Tatmadaw. Sure, that's one of the reasons. But I have a feeling that they are holding on to these places as leverage for negotiations, not just with India, because India's investment lies in Sitwe and then, therefore, the Kaladan multimodal project, not just with China, but also with Tatmadaw.
Right.
Because they have the ability to go at it alone, they might be even looking at doing a revenue sharing maybe with the Tatmadaw.
With the technical.
It's a good source of and a consistent supply of money. If you have some amount of revenue sharing of Sitwe, of Shapshu. For example, last year there was a there was there was news of the Chinese paying the AA for the resumption of their construction work on the port.
Mm-hmm.
So they know that there is much to be had here. And if you ask what they want, they haven't been able to give a definitive answer. Sometimes they talk about sovereignty, sometimes they talk about a confederation. Now, sovereignty, of course, will not be um, acceptable to the Tatmadaw, to the SAC. It won't be acceptable. But something else, maybe more of a federal structure. There,
Autonomy?
sorry,
Autonomy?
depends how they define it. But they haven't. So I think the reason that they've not been clear on exactly what they want, and they haven't been clear on why they haven't taken these three places, is because they're leaving it ambiguous because they might want to negotiate, or they already are negotiating. I don't know. But this is my guess. So obviously, it's very important for India, because if we can be stakeholders, just the way China is, in mediation, bringing some normalcy back to this chaos that we see happening, Arakan can also then be uh, used to help us with some of the problems that we have on our northeastern borders, whether it's the Chin state,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's some of the other ethnic armed organizations, because we know that there has been some amount of tacit support that has been coming, if not really just active support, that has been coming from across the border. People from Chin ethnic armed organizations have been caught in Mizoram.
Mm.
We know that there is some amount of uh, some amount of help that is being offered ever so often. So of course, I think we can leverage this to our benefit. Some amount of communication
But
with
I have
Arakan.
a very naive question. I mean,
Hmm.
excuse me for that naive question. But
Please ask me naive questions. Don't ask me the tough questions
you know,
that you ask.
when you look at these conflicts, and of course, you have Yuan, which borders Myanmar with China. Why is it that most of the trouble is concentrated on the Indian borders? Why is it not the Chinese feel the equal amount of heat on their borders, or they have the same amount of threat from these EBOs or these, armed groups inside their territory? Why is it only unique to Indian borders?
See, I think Indian borders, because they're porous, the Chinese have managed to fence. They keep a real track of their borders, especially on this. They have large borders with Myanmar as well.
Yes.
So they've really managed to fence it properly and have this sort of tracking. But like I said, that they've had problems also, with this sort of population moving in and out. These syndicates, and these syndicates are Chinese syndicates running. So obviously, in a way, a lot of the language barriers,
Hmm.
are not there. Northeastern borders, particularly, are problematic because of how porous they are. Because a lot of it, all this insurgency, a lot of the bases are there. They
They've
keep
been operating out
they've
of.
been operating out of there. It always happens. You look in Bangladesh, where were some of the insurgent groups that came from Bangladesh operating out of? They'd come in, attack, run back out.
Run back. Yes.
So that has been one of the problems. Number two, I think, unlike China, Northeast had, as we spoke earlier, has its own peculiar problem where, the sense of nationhood
Hmm.
lacked in segments, not all. We've had some of the greatest nationalists come from the Northeast. We've had some of the greatest independence movements, rebellions against the British come from the Northeast. So not all, but obviously
With pockets.
the longest running insurgency for a separate state was the Naga
Yeah.
insurgency. So there is a historical context to it, and that became the mothership which inspired other insurgencies as well. And we were not successful in bringing that on, bringing them on board to our idea of nationhood, which, like I said, to a certain extent, our civilizational connections have been so strong that majority of the people were not like that, but then there were groups who were like that,
True.
and that was manipulated over and over again. um, the Naga insurgency, you know very well that there was a huge role of missionaries in the insurgency. There was Reverend Michael Scott, who uh, Jawaharlal Nehru had to throw out of the country because he came in as a mediator between the Nagas and the government of India, the Naga insurgents and the government of India, but only later to be found out that he was involved in working with the Chinese as well. There were weapons that were caught that were being brought in illegally. So the Western interest has always been there.
Sometimes I feel it's a miracle that we have been able to actually hold on to that whole area
Look at the chicken's neck,
for so
22 kilometers.
yeah.
What were
And
we thinking?
what were we thinking, and what are we going to do now?
Well, with Bangladesh
Yeah.
um, being the way it is, and all this noise that we are hearing, and obviously we don't know what is, it's difficult to segregate fact from fiction. And your opinion on this would also be interesting, with them wanting to lease
Hmm.
that area out. Really puts the chicken's neck in a precarious position. Eunice, talking about the northeastern states, uh, ABT, Rahmani leadership, when he was taken out of jail after Yunus came in, the first thing he said is,
Get in.
let's get the Northeast,
Yeah.
let's cut off the chicken's neck. So this is obviously in their mind. Make no mistake.
So how much is it a combined thing between the Myanmar, the Chinese influence in Myanmar, and the renewed Islamist Bangladesh? Do you think they would be somewhere, working together onto this when it comes to India?
See, I think how it would possibly work is one would take it situation by situation.
Okay.
What can be negotiated where? And the last concern on their mind is going to be the Northeast.
Hmm.
In terms of that's going to be collateral damage. But for them, it's going to be step by step. So, for example, um, the fact that China can negotiate with the EOs and Myanmar, what does it tell the world? That China has influence in Myanmar.
Absolutely.
What does it tell the West? That we are here to counter you,
Absolutely.
right? So I think in the same way, when it comes to Bangladesh, what is the message that is going out? We were just talking earlier before this podcast that they're going to be in financial trouble soon,
Yeah,
Bangladesh.
and no IMF loan is coming to save them. So
Where are they going to go?
China is the only thing where they would go to.
Correct? So I think it's step by step that it's built. And I think it is incumbent on us to step by step build as well. That is why I bring up Arakan army in terms of developing our relationship with them. And I don't think anybody will mind if we become good mediators, negotiators between them and the SAC, or try to bring about some amount of normalcy in whatever way we can. If India wants to be a regional power, then India needs to behave and act like a regional power.
This is something which you said very interesting. Why are we still hesitant in behaving as a regional power? I mean, we still do a lot of soft diplomacy. We saw when the earthquake came in Myanmar, India, dispatched so much of aid to Myanmar. We saw something happening in Nepal, same thing in Nepal. We have seen this happening. But why is it that we lack that kind of a decisive push where it is needed the most?
I think one of the reasons is that we've not appreciated other people interfering with our internal politics, and therefore we believe
But
that
regardless, they have been interfering.
they
Even if
have
we have
been.
not,
This is not a justification, but this is the psychology that we feel that, oh, we shouldn't interfere. Let it happen. Let's wait and watch. This is not just a question about governments, but this is, look at the mentality of an individual Indian as well.
We're very reactive. We're not proactive.
We're not
That's a
proactive.
complaint I personally have
Yeah,
as
you
well.
can, everybody has a very quick opinion. But when it comes to doing something, even at an individual level, it's like, abhi ruko thoda.
Let it develop. Let it
अभी
happen.
देखते हैं क्या करते हैं.
Hmm.
It's always the, so this is a personality type maybe, but we've also depended a lot on our soft power more
Hmm.
than need be. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's an amazing thing. America has done so much with the kind of soft power that it's been able to exert. India has been, the mothership for Buddhism, for our civilizational connectivity, right? In Southeast Asia. Of course, we should make use of that. But no longer, in my opinion, should soft power be given the kind of importance that we give it. Sure, continue doing all of that. I think as a big country in this region, it is our responsibility to be the first responders to any sort of natural crisis. Even in Sri Lanka, the way we help them in their financial crisis has earned us a lot of brownie points, a lot of goodwill and genuine goodwill. When we look at Buddhism in Myanmar, no matter how much influence China has, the one thing I noted speaking to people then across is the kind of goodwill that they have for India, not just because we are culturally similar, but also because they see this as the mothership of, their greatest pilgrimage in their lives.
Hmm.
Buddhism is very important to them. They practice it. You'll never meet a Burmese who doesn't believe in, actively doesn't follow the tenets of Buddhism.
Buddhism.
It's a very active, it's a part of their life. They're very gentle, nice people. And it's like a paradox that, it's in the kind of conflict that it is. But I know so many people there that they'll go there, they'll go to, they say that, when we come to India, that's our life's one wish that has been fulfilled, to make this pilgrimage. So, of course, we should bank on that. But I think what's happened is we banked on it too much.
We've not
Continue doing that,
complicated.
but now become active. And don't tell me that we are being too obsessed with China. It's not a question about being obsessed with China. It's about playing equal. It's about, I'm not saying go to
And
Myanmar.
why not be obsessed with China? I mean, on the contrary, I say we are too obsessed with Pakistan. We should not be too obsessed with Pakistan. We should be too obsessed with China, because
See,
that is where the real power
the
is. That is where the
northwestern
problem is.
frontier has always been easier for us to understand because it's one country.
Yes.
It has one religious demography.
Hmm.
So it's been easier for us to understand. The Western media has always been invested in it. The international institutions have been invested in it. And the Congress government was invested in it. The northeastern border has always been complicated for us, complicated for the common mind. We don't understand ethnic rivalries, historical issues. Uh, we don't understand countries beyond. And therefore, it makes it very difficult for us to,
Kind of absorb it.
realize where we are. We are at a turning point. The world for India is never going to be the same. The northeastern frontier is what is going to be the next great game. And it's not just about the conflict. It's not just about China. It's about the natural resources. It's about countries taking an interest in the Bay of Bengal, in the Indian Ocean. It's about expansionism. It's about the strategy of the geostrategy of it all. And I think that is going to be really where things are going to unfold. And we are a little bit late in the game because abhi to hum samajhna shuru kar rahe hain.
Hmm.
And like you said, bringing myself back to that point that you made, that why are we not active? This is the reason. We've always thought that a soft power diplomacy will take us far.
No, even the Americans use a lot of soft power, but they always complement it with the hard power where it is needed, and
And
they're
look, they're
very
not
active into
look, they're
that.
not scared of public opinion. They've managed to justify everything. Now tell me something.
They manage to
They don't
justify from
they
a terrorist to a president. They are able to
correct.
justify it.
See, now you look at Myanmar, and they're pushing for democracy. They are supporting and officially supporting. They don't even call Myanmar Myanmar. They call it Burma,
Hmm.
as to antagonize. the
No.
military, but they've been supporting the NUG. Um, it's, I think last was $240 million. They've been giving TTP, which is the no, what is it? It's the uh, emergency visas. It's like a temporary TPP, I think, temporary protection program,
Hmm.
where they can go there for a temporary period until the conflict is resolved. They were giving them money, God knows what all they were giving them. Fair enough, you want to do that because democracy, real democracy is your plank. That's the guise that you want to do this on. What about democracy in Bangladesh?
And what about democracy in Afghanistan?
Is
And what
you
about Syria?
correct? And is UNIS a elected body? It's an illegal government, to say the least.
An illegal government which has actually slipped away from your grip now and is actively gravitating towards China.
Correct? But uh, there's no justification for that. But they don't care about public opinion. They use muscle power where they need to use it.
But Americans always had this arrogance with them,
They
and
always
that
had
comes
that.
with that status of
But
being the
look,
superpower.
yeah, look, they had this arrogance and they had it for a reason. Fair enough. I'm not saying India needs to be arrogant, but India must realize its potential. And to a certain extent, now it does. We've seen, look at our EM. He doesn't take any
He
nonsense.
doesn't mince any words.
He doesn't mince any words. Look at our prime minister. Just visuals of him getting off that plane from Pahalgam,
Hmm.
said a lot. Because I compare it to what happened in Bombay, the Bombay attacks. What happened post that?
Nothing.
So at
On the
least,
contrary, that dispensation let go of 15 terrorists, including Lashkar Taiba's very wanted terrorists, just for goodwill.
correct.
I mean, that was, and then they,
It's unheard of, those kind of reactions.
yeah.
So yes, we are asserting ourselves in a way, but I think where we need to really do well is the fact that we need to get involved in countries. We need to start becoming, in a positive way, start becoming players. If Myanmar needs us, Myanmar doesn't just need us in terms of humanitarian aid. China has a special envoy who has full access to go to the Tatmadaw, to go to the EOs,
Okay.
ethnic armed organizations, full access. Of course, he also has the power to be able to negotiate. So, the negotiations are quick. So he's given a mandate. Why don't we have a special envoy? Aren't we equal, partners in a way that, don't we have borders that matter?
Are we a bit hesitant in taking China head on in areas where it matters, like Myanmar or
I don't think we
in
are hesitant
Bangladesh?
of China. On the contrary, there's another counter argument that Myanmar could be a place where India and China could have meeting points, because both of us want a unified Myanmar. It's maybe the West that doesn't want a unified Myanmar.
Hmm.
The rest of China and India, the big stakeholders, even Thailand for that matter, wants a unified Myanmar. So, and we want to protect our assets. It could be a place where we could work together if our relationships were better. It could be a place, even as relationships are now, if we were to maybe hit the right buttons, it could be a meeting place. So I don't think India necessarily in Myanmar is afraid of anything. It just, I think, is not realizing the kind of role it can play. And that, I don't think that role is going to upset anyone.
So it's more like lack of attribution or lack of intent.
Correct. I think it's, let's watch. Let's watch.
Let's-
Also, I think India is pulled in so many different directions
Hmm.
at this point that somewhere there is a lack of attention. And I think, uh, I really do hope, because this is a very responsive government, they react quickly. I really do hope that there is enough attention given to Myanmar, because even till date, irrespective of the Chinese influence, and mind you, the Chinese also sent humanitarian aid.
Yes.
It's not just us. Irrespective of that, there's still goodwill for Indians on ground. Indians tend to integrate really well without ruffling any feathers. They
Because we're not
dressed
that is dominating kind of,
they're not dominating, they don't want to assert any pressure on you, they get along with local communities, they imbibe local cultures anywhere in the world. So it is the same in Myanmar. So I think um, it just is a question about attention and a game plan. I'm not even saying that they aren't doing it.
Hmm.
I think they are. I think India is actively sort of communicating. But I think maybe it needs to be quicker, it needs to be bigger, and it needs to be out there at least a little bit in the public domain, not just in the back channels, because then it gives a message to the world that, look, we have influence here as well.
No, I think, and that is important also because from the Bangladesh perspective, because if you're able to send that message out, then you're able to send that message out to Bangladesh as well. Because what I see is, and please tell me what you think about it. We have Pakistan, and I agree, but I think the way Bangladesh is emerging in our east, it's going to be another Pakistan, if not worse, for India in years to come. And what's your opinion on that? I mean, how do you see that?
Look, I see these two countries, I see them really from the point of view that the chaos is going to remain. And yes, I do believe that Bangladesh might become even more unmanageable if elections don't happen quick. Now, the reason I say that elections don't happen quickly, and I say this about Myanmar also. India has always supported democracy and should continue supporting democracy. In Myanmar as well, um, the democratic forces are an important force because that's what allows us to engage with them in a way that matters to us. Same with Bangladesh. It allows us to engage with Bangladesh. Right now, we can't engage with them.
No. With the current dispensation, no
With
chance.
without elections, without a democratically elected government, there's no way we can engage because you just have a set of people who have their agenda already set against India. So I do believe that if we allow this, what has been surprising for us, Raja, is the level of radicalization. We never expected it. Matlab, yes, people who are watching, we could see this happening, but the fact that it would come out in the way it has, in such an unsavory
It
manner,
actually blew up in your face, in
it
everybody's
blew
face.
up.
Yeah.
We knew that a dispensation change might happen. We knew that the West might be involved. They'll never accept that they were involved, but there were sanctions that were put on what is their action battalion, which is their uh,
The Rapid
yeah,
Action Force they had.
yeah, which is their elite paramilitary force. There were sanctions put on them,
The
on their
Americans did that
yes, on their leadership. EU,
because they
Australia.
went after the radicals. And
Correct. All sorts of reasons.
all sort of reasons.
Reasons so we can give up
Uh,
because they don't need a reason.
uh,
Even Awami League leadership के ऊपर था
yes.
sanctions. Then European Union, Australia, America, all came together, passed all these resolutions against Bangladesh, passed sanctions. So obviously there was this thing brewing, but that it would blow up like this, where I also didn't think, honestly, that even if an interim government comes, it would be so blatantly, brazenly anti India.
Because they channeled everything on India. The whole Hasina thing, I think, got channeled on India. That it's all India who has got her here, and it's because of her and everything. It's something, it's I don't know, but I'll tell you something. It's something which you saw in Kashmir. So वहाँ अगर मैम नलका भी फटता था ना तो वो बोलते थे कि ये हिंदुस्तान की प्रॉब्लम ये बिकॉज दिस हैज हैपेंड बिकॉज ऑफ इंडिया it's that kind of thing, and that is very well I can understand that psyche where it comes from.
Yeah, Bangladesh.
I think what we didn't recognize is the level of radicalization which was in Bangladesh. The symptoms were always there. We just kind of ignored them.
See, a big country will always have these problems, right? In a region like ours, a big country will always be blamed for playing big brother or, siding one against the other. It's also a great way for political parties to rile up nationalisms
Hmm.
in their own countries. We've seen that happen in Maldives. We've seen that happen in Sri Lanka,
Everywhere.
Nepal. There will be this resentment that one group or another will be trying to boil up in the name of India.
True.
We have to we have to accept that. But the fact that we knew that this was coming, the fact that we hesitated or again used the wait and watch policy, I think became a bit of a, it came as a shocker, then the outcome of it. And that's the mistake I think we shouldn't make. I think it's very noble of us, very moral of us, um, to be the kind of country that we are, where we don't believe in this sort of interference, that we aren't playing around with internal politics, so on and so forth. But I think it's high time that apart from being noble and moral in the sense that we realize that the world is changing, we are in a precarious position, and that we are surrounded by radicals of one sort or another. If the Americans are in Bangladesh, the Americans are in Myanmar too.
And they necessarily are not there because they are our friends and they concern about us, right?
See, it could also be, look at it this way, when we talk about Americans being in Bangladesh, look at it this way. A lot of people said that, they were there because they wanted to counter China and Hasina's proximity to China. What about if they were trying to counter India as well?
That's exactly the point, because recently Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh made a statement saying that the Rohingya should go back to the Rakhine state, and they would be supported for that. So I can already see, uh, that clash where now, and we know that ISI is in Bangladesh. They've been training them. They've been sending weapons. So I now see a clash between the Rohingyas and the Arakan, mostly in Myanmar. But also these Rohingyas then turning up on our borders and creating trouble for us. They already are inside. We have this problem. See, with Pakistan, the only thing is that a lot of Pakistanis couldn't infiltrate into India. With Bangladesh, the situation is such that a lot of Bangladeshis and Rohingyas which are living in India, right? The border has been very porous, so that is where I see the threat multiplied many times than it is from Pakistanis.
Raja, the Rohingyas have always been a problem. All these people defending the Rohingyas in India probably don't know the history. As I told you before we started the show, that there are letters from the IB chief of the time to Sardar Patel saying that the Rohingyas are being trained by ISI to launch an attack on India to take Tripura at their chosen
Timing may
time.
change. Right.
And they are being kept ready. Rohingyas have been a problem in Rakhine as well. That's why there's this
That is why
huge
Arakan has been
hatred.
coming down till Chittagong hill tracks and trying to tell
There
them
was
to
a cow Mensek massacre
Hmm.
also
Yeah.
for all the people trying to blame the Arakan or blame the Tatmadaw or blame anybody else when Daw Aung San Suu Kyi was uh, in power. Even at that time, that is the time when actually the massive crackdown happened on the Rohingyas. So they've been problematic from the very beginning. They are radicalized. They weren't even called Rohingyas. Rohingyas, they're called now. Earlier on, they were called Arakan Muslims.
Arakan Muslims.
They don't believe that they are from Arakan. They believe that they are from here. These tracks from Bangladesh and so on and so forth. So they're not going to take them back. Now, these news reports are planted to put some amount of pressure. The Tatmadaw is already clarified.
That we don't.
We're not going to take
We're
them.
not going to take them back.
Now, they being on this Cox's Bazar, Tombrew border, of course, is a problem because now we are looking at a generation nikal gayi hai na?
But what stops India from deporting them?
From?
Deporting them.
Well, identification and deportation is a problem. We've not been able to do it when NRC was announced in Assam. Unfortunately, it didn't go as well as we thought.
Yeah.
It was planned, but it's not an easy thing to do in a country like ours, which is so densely populated. Let's think of that as just a tester.
Hmm.
But I think an NRC finally would be really necessary. This is my question in Manipur as well, wherein there were so many complaints about illegal immigration, but eventually who was voted to power was Congress, who has no stance. The party has no stance on NRC. They actually, object to an NRC. So I think things like that would be really important. Um, and I think it's doable. If you remember, right after the Spelgaon
Hmm.
attack, overnight Gujarat say, how many people did they round up?
Yeah.
Pakistanis, over, what was it,
They
4,000?
went for the Pakistanis. They what they got in turn were the Bangladeshis.
Yeah,
About 1,024,029, something like
something
that
like
number. They're
that,
all
right?
Bangladeshis.
So, of course, it's possible if you have the will to do it. Now, places like Assam, there is so much of infiltration. The demography has changed to such an extent that I remember top cop telling me that by 2050,
Hmm.
we are going to have a real problem in our hands because the number of constituencies that are going to have demographic change is going to be enormous.
So how do we deal with this infiltration issue? How actually do we? Because there is an argument that whole of the border cannot be, and that
It
is true
can't
also
be.
because the topography is such. But how do we deal with this issue?
You know, this is a really tough question. And I think people like you, me, others, have pondered about this a lot. But if you have somebody like a Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal, what do you do?
Hmm.
When did the majority of illegal immigration happen in Assam?
In,
When
when the
Assam,
Congress government
yeah.
was there.
I mean, when we have political parties like this, people are still electing them.
But isn't it, the argument, the counter argument is that the borders and the borders are in hand of the center or in the central forces. So then, how do we put the entire blame on the state?
See, of course, like you said earlier on, that the borders are porous. We're not going to be able to plug it. I think now, uh, our border guards are doing a great job on the Tripura side of the border. And I remember about 20 years ago, they used to be criticized
For
for
doing the
not
same job.
doing a good job. So I think those kind of developments are necessary and important, and they will happen slowly as the threat has also become now. We are fully confronted with the threat. But I really do feel a couple of things. Like I said, we have to have some sort of an NRC to identify these people. I think a free hand has to be given um, to the states to carry out this sort of identification and deportation exercises like we saw in Gujarat.
But
Uh,
yeah, but then we'll again get stuck into Bengal. We'll get again stuck into
Correct, we'll
places
get
with big
stuck there.
Congress there.
But जहाँ कर सकते हैं वहाँ तो करें.
But is it
Do you think
possible?
यूपी में नहीं कर सकते?
नहीं कर सकते, बिल्कुल कर सकते.
And Rohingyas, a
जम्मू में है.
majority of the Rohingyas that were caught by the railway police
Hmm.
who were going via Tripura were either landing in madrasas in UP or in Kerala.
Hmm. Yes,
So we
it's all
already know where they
interconnected.
are. We know that they are a threat. I remember when that LET bomb maker, specialist bomb maker Tunda was caught.
Karim Tunda. Yeah.
One of the things that he said, this was in the affidavit that was given to the courts, was that I am training the Rohingyas in bomb making
Yes.
just to be used with the promise that it will only be used
Against the Indians. And that is
against the
where the real
Indians.
threat is because, this hybrid terrorism which we have seen in Kashmir for a very short period and, it might turn up again where, the person is normal sitting like a sleeper cell and one day he just carries out an activity. The problem with Rohingyas is the same. But then do you think the answer lies with the center? Do we need something what the Americans have, like a Homeland Security Department? And take away any power from the state to stop this department from exercising, kind of actions against uh, illegal immigrants. Just round them up and just put them in the jail.
See, I think it works for them. I don't think it'll work for us. The reason being that our states are so, in a way, our states have so much of freedom
Hmm.
that there is a sort of public backlash that the center is always worried about. And in a very religiously sensitive country like ours, if CA could blow up the way it did,
This is completely misrepresented.
matlab
Completely.
misrepresented means people were lying through their teeth. I remember reading articles in the Guardian, and these are supposed to be international
I remember
magazines.
interacting with a
New York.
person. She was a lawyer and heading CA protest in Bihar. And I asked her years later. I said, "What was wrong with CA?" No, CA and NRC. I said, "No, no, no. You tell me what was
Huh.
wrong with CAA." She had no idea. And then she came back and
Nobody
she said,
had
"I'm sorry, I didn't know."
nobody had any idea,
They had no
but
idea.
they were writing things like I still remember. And this girl is a repeat offender British writer. I think she writes for the Guardian or something like that.
Trashki.
Nahi.
Acha koi aur. Okay.
I think her name is, what's her name? Anyway, I don't want to get into trouble
That's okay.
quoting,
That's okay.
but she'd written that, oh, the CA is so draconian that forget the Muslims. It is going to disproportionately impact Muslim women
Hmm.
because they have less papers than even a Muslim
And
man.
that is same with the NRC.
I was like, it has not, let alone, what papers are you talking about? It has nothing to do with an
It has
Indian
got
citizen.
nothing. It has
I
got
had
nothing to do.
educated friends, lawyers, like you said, who were arguing about this. It was ridiculous. Anyway, but I'm saying if that can happen, can it not happen with this sort of sweeping powers if you have?
Hmm.
And we are always under this threat that communal violence will break out, news will be misrepresented. So I think maybe there is too much of danger in that same model. I think it has to be state-wise, more sensitively done. We have to take care of all
Yeah,
these
at least
elements.
if you start being strict in states where you have direct control, like UP, like Jammu
Correct, correct.
Kashmir, other states,
Make
Madhya
them run from
Pradesh,
one place to another.
let them run out to these states, and
Correct.
then the pressure will come on the state
But
government
then the
as well.
problem is now where will they go? Where do you keep them? Nobody wants them. Very well, in all these areas, even in Leh Ladakh
Hmm.
areas, in Kashmir, they are now even intermarrying.
Yes, they are.
In Assam, they're intermarrying. This is problematic because if they're intermarrying, I don't know,
Next 3 generations, they're
next
going
three
to be there.
generations, if it's tribal communities, even bigger
It's
problem
a big
because
problem.
the land becomes their children,
Yes.
and that is now also being called land jihad. So I have absolutely, I may have a lot of doubts about a lot of other things. I have no doubt about the Rohingyas. It's a problematic community. Nobody wants them. They have nowhere to go. They're radicalized to such an extent. The Rohingya group's leadership, Jununi, is Pakistani.
Hmm.
They have these contacts. ISI trains them. Historically, they've been trained. They are.
Now they are being trained again,
I had written an article 2 years ago in India Today saying that wait, they're going to ask for territory.
which they have indirectly through Bangladesh, through Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, which they
I
have.
was, I wasn't pleased with the fact that they've asked, but I was pleased with the fact that at least I knew what was coming,
Come.
because this is exactly what we should be worried about. If they are going to ask for territory, and you'll have all sorts of international bodies also supporting it because they'll say, oh, homeless, nobody wants to take them.
Yeah.
Let
Europe
them
is very kind to them.
let them have a place.
They do that.
Wherein the idea that the world should share
Yeah,
the
nobody,
population, nobody wants it now.
nobody wants.
So I think that is going to be hugely problematic. They are aimed towards us. They are in all sorts of illegal activities. We spoke about drug trafficking also. The major drug traffickers into Bangladesh are the Rohingyas
Hmm.
from Myanmar. All the drugs were being taken by the Rohingyas.
So they are the careers, the low-end careers, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you do with them? Or what,
Because they
why?
don't have a house, they don't have education, they don't have jobs, they don't have security. So they are somebody who's fodder, exact fodder for all criminal and
Absolutely. And
terror
see,
activities. They fit that profile
they're
completely.
living in ghettos.
Yes, completely.
अब generations हो गए. See, 4-5 साल भी काफी होते हैं for a, for a youth to forget
Hmm.
what had happened or how to live a normal life. Even 4-5 years, if you become, once you become,
Part of a normalized society.
yeah, you can't ever go back if, so they have lived like this. So the youth is completely radicalized. Syndicates are running, mafias are running.
So how do we get rid of this problem?
See, we'll just have to be tough. I don't think we can get rid of it. We can prevent further from happening. We can identify, like I said, and maybe put them in some sort of, for the time being, put them in some sort of secluded areas in terms of uh, just, somewhere where they can't be a part of Indian society. Um,
Something like Guantanamo Bay, which the Americans had, or Australians do it near the Phillip Islands. They have a very small island. They put them there, and they
Something
teach
like
them there.
that,
Something like that.
maybe. I don't know the actual answer to this, but I think we really need to begin by rounding them up. This cannot be allowed to happen. They're freely now doing jobs.
Hmm.
And
They have
look,
Aadhaar cards.
they have Aadhaar cards. And look,
They're getting ration. They're getting benefits. They're getting schemes. They're getting everything.
as India becomes more and more sort of powerful, as it becomes a global power to reckon with, there are going to be more and more attacks on it. And I think the fault lines are going to be manipulated. And if the enemy is within like this, see, I also blame people. I also blame people because I feel that none of this can happen if you don't have local support.
True. Without local support, it never happens.
पहलगांव में भी हमने देख लिया ना, there was a certain degree of you know local support where these guys hadn't just come that day to
No,
do
no, no.
this.
Obviously not.
They'd been staying, they had traveled.
Couple of them were involved in previous two attacks as well.
Correct.
So obviously, see with Kashmir, yeah, it's changing. But then to say that everybody, there is no local support, I think that is lying. You
Absolutely.
still have a population there which in their minds breeds the same sentiment of separatism. They do that. Some are there who really want to support it as well. uh, as you said, generations of conflict doesn't change, the mindset doesn't change in 5 years. I think it's the future generations which we are working on, and that is where the real hope lies. I really don't have much hope from the previous generations
Correct.
with their mindset.
But look at what's happened to the future generation in Bangladesh.
They have been constantly radicalized because that
These
thing
were,
has been allowed to carry on.
yeah, these student protests, whether they were financed by, certain vested organizations or not is one thing.
Mm.
But the fact that young people thought that this is a good deal is shocking. That's why I believe that borders should never have just one community living there. There should be mixed
Mixed
communities.
communities.
I think that as much as possible, border crucial border towns, even towns like More, should be made into special economic zones, allowing for business people from around the world to come. But definitely having just one community dominate the borders, any
And
border.
this, no, but this is true because if you go from, you take the Bangladesh border and you come right from Bengal till UP till Gorakhpur, this whole border belt is, dominated by one population. Terai had less than 4% 20 years ago, Muslims. Now they have 96% Muslim population. So it's
Correct,
by design they have been moving up.
correct, correct.
But then the point is, you know what they are up to. Why are we not able to build effective countermeasures when we see this threat emanating on our borders? Why are we sort of letting this happen to an extent where things go out of hand, and then we have a problem at our hand?
See, I don't know how much we can do effectively. I think the intention is there. पहले तो intention भी नहीं था. अब तो at least intention है. I still remember the Home Minister's speech in the Parliament when he was questioned about the Rohingyas during the CA, that why Rohingyas can't be brought in. And I think everybody should watch it. It was one of the most powerful dialogues I'd seen, because he said nothing doing. The stance was very clear. At least that intention is there. The problem is, I think it has just become so monstrous
Hmm.
that we don't have the resources
To effectively.
yes, we do it in piecemeal. Yes, we are aware of it. Yes, we are trying to counter it. But do we have the resources? No, we don't. Unfortunately, it's a big country. It's difficult. There are so many other problems. I'll give you an example. In I think 2017, there was a meeting of the chief ministers of the Northeast in Tripura, where a war on drugs was announced,
Mhm.
wherein all chief ministers were told to take solid action against drug trafficking, drugs coming into the country. We have caught some of the largest hauls of drugs ever caught in the history,
Mhm.
ever caught in the history of India.
Yeah.
But have we been able to stop it
No.
completely? No. So some things, I think, are things that we will have to consistently manage. I don't think they'll ever 100%
100%
be
stop.
plugged.
Hmm.
But can we manage it better? Yes, we can manage it better. Are we doing it right now? I think we are on the way, but there's much to be done.
Which brings me to the last question. Most of what we are seeing on our eastern border and western borders is ideological. Let's look at that. Do you think sorting out a problem with the West and especially Pakistan, if we're able to effectively sort them out after Pahalgam, do you think that is a solution to some extent to our problems in the East? Sorting West will sort East for us as well.
I don't think so. I think sorting the West is probably asking for too much, because there is an obsession.
Hmm.
Pakistan needs to distract its people from what is going on in their own country, whether it's hunger, starvation, economic failure, um, internal conflict, by keeping the India narrative alive.
I have a theory for the whole
Hmm.
Muslim world. The Makkah and the Kaaba is in the West. For the Pakistani, it's on their east. It's the India, because their whole, if from morning to night, they're only looking at India. They're all, they've been going towards to India.
Look, we know for a
I
fact that,
feel that their Kaaba is
correct,
India. It's on the east.
correct,
For the Muslim world, it's the West.
but
They
look,
don't look beyond
the
east.
prime minister has ignored Pakistan. The country, India, had stopped talking about Pakistan till Pahalgam happened. In a way, it
Yeah,
wasn't being given the kind of importance.
that it should have been given
No, that had been given unnecessarily.
unnecessarily. Yeah.
That we said we've got other things to do, and
Uh, we moved on
we
from
moved on.
Pakistan. Yeah.
The prime minister also said, whatever, let them do what they want to do. We have
We
other
have
things to
to
tackle.
tackle.
And then they again brought the attention back to them.
So, if we effectively sort them out, do you think it will sort our problems?
See, the East is going to have a different problem. Like I said, there's just too many things happening in the northeastern frontier. It's not just one state that meets.
That.
Yeah, there are multiple states that are affected. Also, the chaos is an internal problem which is going to continue. The repercussions of that internal problem are going to fall on us. So it's a different situation in that sense. Having said that, I think we must remember that there are a couple of things. In the case of Myanmar, like I said, the China influence is there. But also you must remember that there is a Christian angle to it, in terms of the fact that US is interested, because there are many states there that are Christian, three
Yeah.
that are Christian. So they are going to want to have some leverage with them. They are going to want to get involved. Critical earth mining. Yes, sure, there are loads of places that you can get critical earths, heavy rare earth elements from. Myanmar being one, and it's a conflict country, probably the cheapest place you can get it from at this point. There's that interest, because remember, the West has a 2050 green, US has a 2050 green transition plan. Where do you think the elements will come from? Right now, already, I think 90% of it lands in China illegally, critical earth minerals, and then majority of that, 80% of that, lands in the US. I'm not saying the studies are saying this,
No, that is true.
right?
That is
So
how it is working.
all of this is going to be the next exciting thing. And why I don't see Pakistan problem resolving very soon, because remember, they've just made their bid for the critical earth mining in Pakistan.
But that's, if you look from the practical purposes on Pakistan, they might have spoken about critical minerals. Where is the critical mineral in Pakistan? There is no study which has ever been done, right? And it sounds funny, but in critical mineral conference, Shahbaz Sharif was talking about selling coal and making cement. That is how bad that conference went.
But that's probably Shabazz.
Yeah,
He
but
probably doesn't know
where
the
in
difference.
Pakistan is critical minerals? Because there is no study, there is no feasibility study apart from Recodec, which already 50% they have sold to the Canadian company, to Barrick Gold.
Correct. But see, what happens is that they might not have any studies or whatever. You need feasibility studies. The Americans may have done it. It was a good time for them to bring it up, because when during the tariff war, when China said we won't give them, right, this situation came up with Pakistan. But wherever you'll find these river belts and things like that, around that, if you do, you will find some.
You will have China and Pakistan, China and Americans hunting in that area.
Correct.
That's given.
But I'm just saying that right now, I don't see that also ending because of all these multiple reasons. I don't see Myanmar coming to any conclusion, because there are just too many interests there. And the interests that they have are big interests, whether it's China's interest, whether it's the US interest, even India's interest. These are not minor interests. Bangladesh, once a country is radicalized, no country has ever been able to go back to its former self.
Very difficult.
So that brings us to our answer.
So does that mean India is quite alone in its own neighborhood and has to navigate its own way?
Absolutely. India has to think for itself first, keep itself priority. I think needs to really start looking at things from a security lens. Like I said earlier on, we've given a little bit of weightage to soft power. I think hard power is what we need to build up. Processing units. If we have ambitions, why don't we have processing units? Critical earth processing units. We want to get into the semiconductor business. We want to have space ambitions. That's where the private players need to be supported to be able to create production or units like this that China already has. So I think we need to think about the future. We need to safeguard ourselves. We need to have the security lens as a priority to us, because that is what's going to limit us. Everything else we can manage.
No, that is true.
Our internal fault lines we can manage. Our communal issues, if they are even being manipulated, we can manage. We have enough intelligence, we have enough resources to figure out how it's being manipulated. I think it was clear to everyone during CAA how things moved. We can manage our economy. We can manage, climate change. What we can't or should actually not take lightly is security, because that's not what's going to happen in the neighborhood is going to happen irrespective of
changes which will happen.
Yeah, but what we can do is try to prevent it from impacting us internally.
No, that's true, because if we want to have a strong economy, we need to have a strong security. Without strong security, there cannot be a strong economy which can be
that really has to be a priority. And I think this government has had a certain amount of attention on enhancing its capabilities, but I think because we've started so long late, we are lacking in it. Therefore, now we are talking about border fencing. And look, border fencing doesn't necessarily mean physical border.
No.
It can be an integrated system.
Yes. We have it on
Surveillance.
LOC.
Correct. You can have surveillance. You can have certain areas that are manned, certain areas which are physically,
You have sensors. You have so many.
so
I
many
mean, there's so
things.
many ways to
So
do
it's
it.
not, so that's what we need to understand. And people need to be a little bit more responsible. Local leadership needs to be responsible, because when we spoke about fencing on the northeastern border, when we spoke about suspending FMR, not even revoking it, suspending it, people were up in arms. The same people who were complaining were also up in arms saying that, but we have trade across the border. We have transnational ties. It's like our cousin communities. And when I went to Myanmar also, they were worried that, it would, nobody's saying that this needs to be cut, but should people not be tracked
No,
if they're
but
coming into the
you can
country?
always have a manned entry point and an exit point. You can still do your trade, but do it in a proper way where you are being checked and you're being,
Correct.
accounted
People
for.
complain about, oh, we aren't giving enough refugees, we aren't bringing enough refugees in. Look, you can bring them in, but they need to be identified. There was a registration process in Mizoram. There wasn't a registration process in Manipur.
Manipur, right?
They are right. We have refugees right up till in Delhi as well. So it's not that we're not willing to do our job, and as a big country we aren't willing to look after our neighbors. But there has to be some limitations to it, and there has to be rules and regulations that go along with it. The problem in India is that there'll always be a counter voice voicing for some random thing.
But I think it's important to cut that clutter and the noise and focus on what the country really needs, and that is a very, very strong security. I believe. I think that should
The
be a
security
focus.
apparatus has to be precise. We have to have experts um, who are leading these initiatives. I don't think now, without subject expertise, you can actually get a reality
Check on the
check
ground.
on the ground. I think all of that needs to be done. And these voices that come up, always, looking at things from the humanitarian lens where they needn't be looked at, should be ignored. I don't think we really should give so much of importance. This is why China can take a lot of action quicker. People
Mhm.
say, oh, look how far China's reached. They don't need to take permission from everybody. I'm not saying that we are like China. We are a democratic country. Everybody's voice matters. But right now, I think the game needs to change.
With that, I really, really thank you for this,
Not
and
at all,
thank you for
Raja.
having giving me so much of time and discussing this thread.
Not at
Thank
all,
you so much for
Raja.
your time, man.
Thank you for
Namaste.
having me.